Thank you, Secretary Rubio. Please, if you could now turn your attention to the screens for a video message from the head of the National Committee for the Administration of Gaza, Dr. Ali Shaith.
Distinguished leaders, colleagues, and friends, it is an honor to be here today. I want to start by thanking President Donald J. Trump and his administration for their intensive efforts to advance peace in the whole region. I also thank Egyptian President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi, Qatar, and Turkey as mediators, the Palestinian Authority, and members of the United Nations Security Council for welcoming the comprehensive peace plan. These efforts created the opportunity for a new future in Gaza Strip. But what will really matter is what comes next. This transition will succeed only if it delivers real, tangible improvements in daily life for Gazans. As Chief Commissioner of the National Committee for the Administration of Gaza, it's my responsibility to turn this moment into action, to restore order, to rebuild institutions, and to create a future for the people of Gaza defined by opportunity and dignity, under the principle of one authority, one law, and one weapon.
Yet in holding scientific research and discovery in respect, as we should, we must also be alert to the equal and opposite danger that public policy could itself become the captive of a scientific, technological elite.
Do you know, as far as putting words in order is concerned, AI already thinks better than many of us. Therefore, anything made of words will be taken over by AI. If laws are made of words, then AI will take over the legal system. If books are just combinations of words, then AI will take over books. If religion is built from words, then AI will take over religion.
Today is the beginning of that, of a new era and a new stage that we think is so important as a model to the rest of the world of what is possible. And clearly the focus is right now on Gaza and making sure that the plan that's about to be presented to you here today, this vision for the future of Gaza.
2 weeks ago, they saw weapons that nobody ever heard of. They weren't able to fire one shot at us. They said, what happened? Everything was discombobulated. They said, we've got him in our sights. Press the trigger, and nothing happened. No anti-aircraft missiles went up. There was one that went up about 30 feet and crashed down right next to the people that sent it. They said, what the hell is going on? Those defensive systems were made by Russia and by China. So they're going to go back to the drawing boards, I guess.
Well, finally. Finally, we have peace in the Middle East. Because they declared it. Gotta be excited about that, right? Oh my goodness. Where to even begin? I've been spending the past week or so going over a variety of things that came out of the World Economic Forum summit at Davos. And there's so much that could be said. It was quite the event. Of course, most people saw the Yuval Noah Harari clip talking about AI taking over religion. He knows what he's doing, man. He's always good for a good soundbite. But, of course, a lot of people were focused on the Greenland thing and Trump's speech.
This enormous unsecured island is actually part of North America, on the northern frontier of the Western Hemisphere. That's our territory.
It's interesting that Greenland got so much attention, and again, I think that was by design. But it's good for headlines and giving people another thing to argue about. But for me, there was two things that stuck out from Davos that were kind of the main takeaways that I've been focused on the most, and they kind of go hand in hand in this ironic way. And that is the rolling out of the Gaza Development Plan and the Board of Peace, specifically Jared Kushner's presentation that we'll get to in a minute. But the whole thing was pretty astonishing. It's amazing because every time I think to myself that nothing will surprise me anymore, or nothing could be shocking after all these years, inevitably they find a way to challenge that assumption and roll out something that is so both dystopian and comical at the same time that it kind of boggles the mind. So the whole Board of Peace and Gaza plan definitely falls into that camp. But it's just made that much more dystopian and comical by the fact that it's being coupled. This whole Board of Peace plan is being rolled out at precisely the same time that the U.S. government decides to say, hey, guess what? We do have directed energy weapons. They're not a conspiracy theory, so add that to the ever-growing list of things that are no longer conspiracy theories. The Department of War even tweeted this recently, which is the most official announcement there is. We have them, we're scaling them, and Trump even brought it up very specifically in his speech about the energy weapons.
2 weeks ago, they saw weapons that nobody ever heard of.
Which makes it kind of hard not to think about the verses that say, who is like the beast, who can make war with him? And when you think about this whole Board of Peace controversy, and we'll get into this more in detail, it's hard for me not to conclude looking back that World War III pretty much did begin in 2020 with COVID 1984. You could argue that it began September 11th, 2001, or maybe that was all preamble, but it's all part of the same master plan. And so I've got a number of clips both from Davos itself here and some commentary that I thought is kind of helpful so that I'm not trying to summarize everything myself, because I'm still honestly trying to process the scope of what has just unfolded in front of us. Because, I mean, I think at best case scenario, we're looking at Donald Trump's most audacious cash grab. You know, this puts the Trump coin scam to shame. Best case scenario, the Board of Peace amounts to a whole lot of nothing in the end, and Trump just put a few $1 billion in his pocket from whatever countries he can convince to join. At the very least, it is that. But anything more than that, then yes, it is potentially a replacement for the UN, or sort of the beginning of a transition in the same way that the UN eventually replaced the League of Nations that was put in place after World War I. And it's astounding because all this talk about Trump, is he going to go for a third term? Well, potentially he wouldn't even need to do any of that. All this stuff about him being a king. Well, he just went ahead and created, through this UN Security Council Resolution 2803, that was in November of last year, is what mandated this Board of Peace, which is a private corporation where Trump is the CEO. And if you actually read the charter of the Board of Peace, there's nothing in the charter that even specifically mentions Gaza or limits it in any way. It's worldwide and ongoing, and Trump can be the chairman. He's the chairman of the Board of Peace until the day he dies, which may not be that long. But I did want to play this clip from Yanis Varoufakis, who's the former finance minister of Greece, and he talks about the historical and legal significance of what's going on here.
You will recall, and I'm sure our audience knows this very well, that the United Nations Security Council has been making every few months, every year, all the time, some efforts to keep on the rails the peace process, or whatever is left of the peace process, between the two sides, the Israeli side and the Palestinian side. And the United Nations has this tactic, or let's say it's an institutional memory, not tactic, institutional memory, whereby, you know, every resolution follows the previous resolutions. So, you know, if you follow the history of the engagement of the United Nations with the issue of Palestine, you'll find that there is a continuity. It begins with the recognition of two parallel states, Israel and a Palestinian state. One of them was inaugurated, the other one never was. And then it moves on to resolutions after every battle was fought, every defeat of the Palestinian people. What the 17th of November resolution accepting the Board of Peace as the next step in this process, what it does, it annuls this whole history. Essentially, it was a remarkable success by Donald Trump to step in and salvage the bacon of Benjamin Netanyahu, because you will recall that before that resolution, before the ceasefire, the so-called ceasefire, because there is no ceasefire, I mean, Palestinians are being killed and starved to death on a daily basis as we speak. What that so-called ceasefire and the resolution by the Security Council did was essentially to save Netanyahu from a major propaganda defeat. You will remember that 4 major countries, middle powers, Canada, Australia, Britain, and France, recognized the state of Palestine. It was a very hypocritical recognition, because they never, if they really wanted to do something about bringing about the Palestinian state, which they recognized so hypocritically, they would have stopped arming Israel, they would have embargoed Israel, they would have done all the things that the BDS movement says that they should be doing, but they never did that. But nevertheless, it was still a major defeat for Netanyahu. Trump steps in, imposes that ceasefire, brings about the notion of a Board of Peace, which will be totally outside international law, totally outside the history of the Palestinian occupied lands as occupied lands, and effectively resets the clock as if we're going back to 1945 or 1948, or maybe even before that. That saved Netanyahu because, let's face it, the International Court of Justice in June of 2024 had clearly stipulated that Israel was in breach of international law, ordered Israel to withdraw from East Jerusalem, the West Bank, and Gaza. You had international condemnation of the genocide. You had the International Criminal Court indicting Netanyahu and his former defense minister as war criminals. And with that resolution, the United Nations Security Council effectively annulled all that. And we go back to a situation, Glenn, and this is the point, the main point I want to make, whereby Gaza doesn't belong to the Palestinians anymore. There are no Palestinians in the resolution. They don't exist. It is as if it is Terra Nullius, an empty land. And I'm mentioning that term very poignantly because Terra Nullius was the legalistic term that European colonial powers used back in, a century ago, or more than 2 centuries ago, in order to justify colonizing various lands around the world, from Australia, New Zealand, Kenya, South Africa, and so on. The first thing that the European colonizers did was to say that land has no people and no history, no owners. It's outside international law. It's like, going to an asteroid between Jupiter and, I don't know, some other planet. Right? And, the fact that the United Nations recognize that and recognize that there is going to be a corporation, a private company, that is going to have as a lifelong chairman a man, not a president, not a representative of the people, but a man called Donald J. Trump. And that he has no obligation whatsoever. He's not answerable to the board. He's not answerable to the United Nations. He's not answerable even to the Congress of the United States of America. And he simply has to give a report every 6 months to the United Nations, if he wants to. It's not even a report that has to be approved of or anything like that. So essentially, the United Nations annulled itself when it approved of that resolution on the 17th of November, 2025. And I have to, and this is how I'm going to complete my long answer. Apologies for taking so long, but I'm livid about all this. Why did the French and the British, who had supposedly recognized the state of Palestine, including Gaza, only a few weeks before, why did they accept that? Well, they accepted that because for them, this was something that concerned brown people in the Middle East. It didn't concern them. Now they know better. They know that the Board of Peace is not just about Palestine. It's not about Gaza. And now the Board of Peace is about everything. And, you have all these Bond villains that Trump has amassed, has surrounded himself with. And he's talking about Greenland. Tomorrow he's going to talk about Canada. And, now the chickens are coming home to roost, metaphorically speaking. And you have people like, Mark Carney, the liberal premier of Canada, Prime Minister of Canada, coming out with a very interesting speech in Davos recently, saying, "Oh my goodness, this is the end of the world as we knew it." Well, you idiots, you brought this about by approving a United Nations resolution which effectively annuls the United Nations and annuls international law and annuls your right to exist.
So I know there's a lot that he kind of brought up in there, but the point that jumped out to me was this mention of the concept of the Terra Nullius, which, as he said, is this Latin term that means empty land or nobody's land, that goes back to essentially the colonial times when they would invoke this term to describe territories that were not claimed by any of the colonizing empires, right? And even saying that, I know that, it's interesting that as soon as you mention something like colonialism today, I mean, that's instantly going to sound like a liberal intersectionality talking point, right? The same way that the word fascism has been kind of integrated as this, dog whistle of the lefty Antifa narrative and all this stuff. And which all, again, I think is all by design. But I kept thinking about this Terra Nullius idea, not in the old colonial context, but seeing that as sort of actually a very helpful way of understanding how it was applied back several hundred years ago. But what's happening now, it is going to be the same thing. But when you understand it through the real New World Order, the new colonization is not physical but digital. And through the tokenization of everything in the world, it's the same concept where, because of course they weren't empty lands. They were just considered empty if a colonial power had not planted a flag on it. If they were considered too primitive or tribal or whatever, they didn't count. But that's a perfect analogy for understanding how the new colonizing empire, the digital empire, the tokenizing empire, the one world economy, the stablecoin empire that Trump is pushing through right now, that's essentially how they view the old system. And so it's just been fascinating watching this year's WEF, where the US administration suddenly has this giant presence and it's this big Zionist kind of coming out party at the WEF, and Klaus Schwab has conveniently stepped down because of scandal or whatever. Basically, he had become a PR nightmare. He had become a meme.
I see the need for action. I see the need for a great reset.
And I wrote a short Substack article kind of basically talking about how I view this whole rebranding of the Great Reset. I wrote an article called The Great Pivot. So Klaus Schwab is out, eat the bugs, all that stuff, that's the old WEF. This is the new based WEF with Trump, and it's amazing. From a propaganda study perspective, this is one of the most fascinating things I've seen in quite some time. You're rebranding the WEF, which, during COVID was like globalism. This is the face of all these cliches of, you'll owe nothing and you'll be happy, right? It's global communism. But it was all attached to the climate change agenda and carbon tax and your social credit score being tied to energy consumption. But with AI and the rise of all the data centers now, of course, it makes it a little harder to demonize the average citizen for his energy consumption. I'm sure they'll still try and do it, but, when data centers are just eating up water and electricity like nobody's business, suddenly it's just been a hard pivot from the eco-tyranny to now the digital algorithmic tyranny, the data center tyranny. But framing it all as, America first, and it's anti-woke, even though it's all the same corporate schmucks, as if Larry Fink of BlackRock wasn't the one pushing all the DEI. BlackRock was the one at the top pushing the DEI down through the corporate food chain. So it's amazing that he's still there, and it's like, oh, because he wasn't Klaus Schwab. I don't know. It's just, it's astounding. But yeah, it really is like this grand assembly of supervillains who are all under Trump. And so it's amazing to see how many, MAGA folks or Trump faithful, or not even that. I think there's a lot of people that realize that Trump isn't delivering what he promised per se, but they still can't quite bring themselves to believe that that he is the new Klaus Schwab, that he is the new, if not something far beyond anything we've seen before. but doing it in the name of capitalism, doing it in the name of national interest and all these things. And especially with, like, you know, going back to Greenland, you know, and also in talks with, you know, oh, are we going to acquire Alberta as part of some sort of North American Union, where it's like, yeah, the Dawn Road Doctrine, it's expansion, but being framed as a retreat. Like, oh, globalism is dead and the old rules-based order, it's like, well, all of that was, of course, like conspiracy theory if you talked about globalism, even though they were talking about it out in the open, you know, for decades. But, you know, you'd be called a crazy person if you talked about globalism. So it's just been this endless gaslighting kind of dialectic like that. But now they're coming out and saying, yeah, the old system is dying and dead, the old globalist world order. So now we've got to basically reorganize everything. And on the one hand, they're gearing up for war with Russia and war with Iran still. But at the same time, Russia, with this UN Security Council resolution 2803 last year, Russia just abstained, but nobody actually voted against it.
The result of the voting is as follows: 13 votes in favor, 0 votes against, 2 abstentions. The draft resolution has been adopted as Resolution 2803, 2025.
So what, you know, Varoufakis is saying is that they were duped, I guess. Duped into thinking it was just about Gaza, when in reality they've sort of, like, the UN voted in their own nullification, basically effectively rendering themselves neutered, and, you know, they've been upstaged by this completely privatized corporatocracy, you know, global peace Inc. And of course, I'd be remiss if I did not speak about just the weird, delicious irony of Trump creating a logo that is essentially the same as the UN. You know, it has the same laurel wreath, of course, which goes back to the Roman Empire, right? The laurel leaf was the sign of imperial Rome, right? That's what the Roman emperor would actually wear, and what they would give as a crown at the original Olympic Games and things like that. So that's an ancient Roman imperial symbol, you know, world government. And now, of course, they replaced the flat AE map with the globe. And of course, everyone's just talking about the fact that it's showing the Western Hemisphere with North and South America as being the controversial thing there. But to me, it seems kind of fitting, since the United States government has played a rather central role in the illusion of the globe itself, and that the globe, and I've talked in videos before about the globe basically being the icon of the New World Order, the icon of the one world system in itself, and here it is. And a gold one, no less. So it's like, there's so many delicious ironies going on. But getting into this presentation with Kirshner, I don't even know how to put into words how disturbing it, I mean, and I've seen some disturbing PowerPoint presentations over the years. I think, you know, Dr. James Giordano has probably some of the most crazy PowerPoints out there. But this gives him a run for his money, I'd say. And he just comes out talking about 90,000 tons of munitions dropped. He just starts rattling off these statistics like they're just general consumer information, like any other bland corporate pitch.
So quickly, I'll go through this 2-year war, 90,000 tons of munitions. There's over 60 million tons of rubble there, and tens of thousands of fatalities. Through the ceasefire, we were able to get to through the 20-point plan, ceasefire, release of hostages. Getting the UN resolution passed was a huge, huge effort, really thanks to Mike Waltz and the whole team there. They did an incredible job. And we've then, with the help of the UN, we've worked very, very well with them. This is why you need a new organization like the Board of Peace to work with the UN. I want to thank Tom Fletcher, did an incredible job of really getting it going. We've done historic humanitarian aid. Going forward, number one thing is going to be security. Obviously, we've been working very closely with the Israelis to figure out a way through de-escalation. And the next phase is working with Hamas on demilitarization, which I'll talk about in a second. But without security, nobody's going to make investments. Nobody's going to come, build there. We need investments in order to start giving jobs. We want to take these people. 85% of the aid of Gaza, 85% of the GDP of Gaza has been aid for a long time. That's not sustainable. It doesn't give these people dignity. It doesn't give them hope. And so we want to use free market economy principles. A lot of what President Trump spoke about that he's doing in America, we want to bring the same mindset, the same approach to a place like Gaza to give these people the ability to thrive and have a good life.
Yeah, and then they go on to talk about historic humanitarian aid. And yeah, 100% of basic food needs met for the first time since 2023, which, I mean, all of this must be true because it's right there up on the PowerPoint presentation. It's on the screen. It's totally real. Problem solved because we made a graphic.
Israel will suspend over 24 humanitarian organizations from operating in Gaza, including major groups like CARE and Doctors Without Borders. The groups will have their licenses revoked in Israel on January 1st and will have to leave the country by March 1st. That's because Israel says they failed to comply with new registration rules that were designed to prevent the infiltration of the groups by Hamas or other militant organizations. The aid groups say they didn't comply with the rules because they were invasive and required them to give information about their Palestinian staff members in Gaza. More than 500 aid workers have been killed in Gaza over the course of the war.
And there's totally 4,000 aid trucks per week going into Gaza. Just the sheer... This was one of the most stomach-turning things I perhaps have ever seen. That after October 7th, the super real and unquestionable events of October 7th, 2023, right, which you then totally owned, that you went and flattened this concentration camp that you created over the decades in retaliation for the hundreds of fatalities and yes, the alleged hostages. I mean, good grief. But then to turn around and be like, yeah, guess now that we've just bombed the hell out of you for 2 years and killed officially at least 70,000 people, including women and children, and you've been living in basically a squalid garbage dump, completely cut off. It's the most inhumane thing we've ever seen in our lifetimes. But now we're going to turn it into a resort facility. Now this this mass grave is going to become the shiny new Gaza with the futuristic looking hotels and the waterfront, and it's going to be this AI freedom city. I'm so at a loss for words for just how many times can you say dystopian before it just becomes meaningless? This was never a part of the dispensationalist miraculous return to the land time frame that I ever learned about in church growing up. So it's kind of fascinating on so many levels, prophetic and just from, I mean, think about all the history classes you had in school growing up and learning about the UN and World War II, and now it's like, what are we watching right now with this Board of Peace? I mean, yeah, like I said, maybe it's just a total scam and it's just much ado about nothing. Honestly, though, here, I think I'll play this Ryan Christian clip because he does a pretty good job explaining how Gaza is it is the blueprint for the rest of the world, as the Board of Peace is a worldwide body.
But at the end of the day, it really, in my mind, is the same agenda. Donald Trump and his team at the World Economic Forum in Davos, yes, they shout some token things out, globalism is dead, and then outline the globalist agenda that they're rolling out. It's with Gaza and the presentation of what appears to be a new global UN dynamic that Trump is creating, but he's not a globalist. It's all kind of a bait and switch. And so what I see is that being this extension of it today. It's what I framed it as a techno-feudal state. I mean, and this is what it seems is even, I mean, short of like saying that exactly, what they're framing in their own literature about this. The reference goes to now I'm blanking on his name, Srini Vasan, the former CTO of Coinbase. He's the one that wrote this book and is kind of, a major part of this, discussing how he sees this. And weirdly enough, I was just reading about how this goes back to even before this point, discussing doing this in San Francisco. So there's like this evolving agenda, but what he calls tech Zionism, which I think is just wildly problematic with what we see Zionism doing in the world today, and obvious other conversations we could have. But really, even if you take it the way they want you to perceive Zionism, it still basically means taking territory from something else and repurposing it for your agenda. But to go to the larger view about what this transition is, right? Like I said before, it's my opinion that this is a reaction to the elitists. I don't think they're elite. I think they're elitist, but at the same point, of these people in these inner circles recognizing diminishing influence in the average conversation. You could even go back further in history and argue that this transition away from the feudal state mindset was basically a way to convince us that we were in control when we still weren't. I think that's kind of what this is now, is to transition to the new system to make us think we picked this when it's even less influence. But at the end of the day, it comes down to this network state agenda, right? And this overlaps with, this is what I really wanted people to see early on in Trump's administration, that the Freedom City agenda is the same conversation. Seasteading, Freedom Cities, Praxeas, Greenland, Prospera, it's all the same thing. Almost every part of it tied back to Pronomos Capital, which is Mark Andreessen, Peter Thiel, all, kind of driven. And it all comes back to this kind of, philosophical driving mindset from the Curtis Yarvin kind of, many books they've written. There's so much we can get into that's just what they say is terrifying to me. But then the point is that this is about transitioning into, like Vanessa was discussing, kind of away from the current reality of the way our government structure works. And the main point is everything I'm seeing today is just because I think most people are unhappy with that. Most Americans, most people in the world are tired of the way that governments have been abusing everybody. And so they find a way to convince us this is the solution to that. Sort of like saying we're going to end the Fed, but here's a CBDC. It's like this, everything like that is happening right now. And so they're driving us into this position where they're creating, a CEO run, tech run, Freedom City, whatever. And this is what Trump was discussing. That's also promoted. And if it was to happen, the funding was coming from the same people involved with Prospera. Freedom Cities, Inc., or whatever the company was called, that is backed by the same people that's driving Prospera. That's Peter Thiel, that's Mark Andreessen, that's the same conversation. So what I see is these people either with Trump's administration or all of the U.S. government's involvement or just of their own volition through lobbying, which kind of ends up being the same point, they're trying to reimagine the way our society operates. Mark Andreessen and Joe Rogan discussed literally this mindset, like trying to convince us that no, the old ideas of democracy have never worked. And I'm of the mind, by the way, that democracy's mob rule, constitutional republic is what should be discussing, or just no government really. But the point is that they're saying that your system doesn't work. What you need is the good oligarchs. That's what he actually discussed. Come to save you from the bad oligarchs. So it's like they're really showing you this transition of power, and it very well could be an illusion of the same people, or you could argue this is a different group of elitists trying to take power from another group of elitists, but none of them, in my mind, have the interest of the people at heart. And if you really dive in, last point on this, of the network state mindset, of what they write, even like aside from the kind of token libertarian mindset things they throw over the top, in material, like in practice, what they're doing is the opposite. And you can see this, and I think it goes to a point of the Great Reset mindset, of you'll own nothing and be happy, despite the way they frame it. When it comes to the digital mindset, you own the keys to all of your assets, but who controls those keys? This is the way they're framing this. It's like having something in Coinbase where they can go, yeah, you can access it, but we can decide to cut you off the moment we don't like what you're saying out loud, which is happening. So it's a transition, it's an illusion of control.
And again, this is not like runaway conjecture. All you have to do is listen to Marco Rubio at this presentation, literally saying the same thing, that New Gaza is the model for the rest of the world.
This is a group of leaders that are about action. And the President of the United States is a president of action, of getting things done. And today is the beginning of that, of a new era and a new stage that we think is so important as a model to the rest of the world of what is possible. And clearly the focus is right now on Gaza and making sure that the plan that's about to be presented to you here today, this vision for the future of Gaza, this vision for the future of the region, is not just possible and promising. It is our destiny if we put the time and the effort that it requires, as I know this board will do. But I also think it will serve as an example of what's possible in other parts of the world. Without losing focus on what's before us now, this is what's possible for other places and other conflicts that seem impossible to solve right now.
So all it is just the same 15-minute city, smart city stuff that everyone 4 or 5 years ago was rejecting when it was Klaus Schwab and his concept of the concentration camp digital city, the AI-driven surveillance state. It's all the same stuff, brought to you by Trump and co. Brought to you by Freedom Inc. Brought to you by Big Tech, Big Zyotech. Meet the new boss, potentially even worse than the old boss.
you asked me, what will the response of the military-industrial complex be, of big tech and Wall Street? Well, let me take these one at a time. The ones who are loving it are big tech, because I've written a book a couple of years ago called Techno-Feudalism, in which I argue that a new form of capital has emerged, living in our phones. It's called cloud capital. It's not producing anything except the power directly to control our minds, and through that to amass particular forms of rents in the pockets of big tech. And this cloud capital, over the last few years, especially after the war in Ukraine and the genocide in Gaza, this cloud capital is merging with the military-industrial complex, because we have autonomous AI drones, we have software by Palantir that is running on the servers of Amazon Wire Services and of Google and of Microsoft. And these pieces of software are being trained in Gaza, they are being trained in Ukraine, and then, the result of this training is pieces of software that then are sold to the National Health Service in Britain, for instance. So you have the privatization of the National Health Service by American cloud capital trained in the killing fields of Gaza. So, as I said, big tech is loving it. And this is why people like, Jeff Bezos, like Mark Zuckerberg, even Elon Musk, who despised Donald Trump, have surrounded him, and they are, treating him, they're looking at him as their great benefactor. And just another dimension which explains the great enthusiasm of big tech for Donald Trump. With the Genius Act last April, that he passed through the Senate and through the House of Representatives, essentially he's legitimizing the privatization of the dollar through big tech, through companies like Tether. And now, you're going to have Google and Apple and others, issuing their own stable coins. These are not like, they're cryptocurrencies, but they're nothing like, let's say, Bitcoin, which is a bit anarchic. No, these are US dollar denominated cryptocurrencies. And that is going, essentially, we're going back to the 19th century when private banks had the capacity to mint dollars, a capacity that was at some point taken over and monopolized by the Fed. And the Fed has had its wings clipped. So big tech loves all that. It loves the ball of peace. It loves what's happening in Palestine. It loves what's happening with stable coins and the privatization of the dollar.
However they're describing this, and when you're talking about freedom cities, I urge everyone to watch Jared Kushner's presentation on the Gaza plan, which I've been saying for nearly 2 years now, or even longer, that Gaza is the model for the future of all humanity. So what you're seeing Jared Kushner roll out in Gaza, so you've got the so-called free zone, trade areas, and then he actually described them. He didn't quite call them labor camps, or did he? I can't quite remember whether he used that terminology or not. But effectively, that's what they are, right? And then there was going to be a Hamas area where they can corral and imprison, effectively keep in a concentration camp anyone that retains any kind of resistance against the Zionist regime takeover of their territory. And of course, that's in conjunction with the billionaire complex in the United States and in the entire Zionist bloc, consisting of the Gulf states and any countries that have or are on the point of normalizing with Israel. And so go and look at the Gaza model, because honestly, that's exactly what is going to be rolled out in every single country eventually. The general population are going to be reduced down to labor, effectively, to maintain the privileges, the power and the status of the ruling elite. And in the middle class, there'll be this battle, what's left of it. There'll be a battle between those that don't want to go down to the labor camps and who want to enter the elite circles. I mean, it's literally George Orwell Animal Farm stuff rolling out. But the Gaza model is incredibly important for people to actually understand what is incoming in our culture and society.
The military-industrial complex is a little bit more worried I mean, they like war. They like, these interventions. They like the fact that they're selling huge quantities of weapons to Ukraine with European money more recently, that Israel is eating up their, 10,000, 20,000 pound bombs like confetti. They love that. They're a little bit worried that companies like Palantir, the big tech companies, the techno-feudal war machines, as I call them, they're, sort of competing with them. They're a little bit worried about that. But I think that the one of the three conglomerates that you mentioned in your question, that is Wall Street, I think they're the ones who are the most worried by Donald Trump. And they're worried because, as I said, with the Genius Act, he is effectively eating into their financial rents on behalf of big tech companies, of Tether, of stablecoins, and so on. They will try to join them. JP Morgan, for instance, is about to issue its own stablecoin, but they are worried. So when you see that Donald Trump is fighting over the, who's going to control the Fed, he's trying to clip the wings of the chairman of the Fed, and also of the powers of the Fed through legislation like the Genius Act. This is because the Fed belongs to the large banks, to Wall Street banks, and they don't want to have to compete with Silicon Valley, with the West Coast. But nevertheless, it's clear to me that so far, Donald Trump manages to dominate those three: Wall Street, big tech, and the military-industrial complex. And they're on board what he's doing with the Board of Peace and the dissolution, essentially, of the United Nations, turning the United Nations effectively into what the League of Nations was, an empty shell.
So we did a master plan. We brought in, I thank you, Keir Gabay, who's one of the most successful real estate developers and brilliant people I know. He's volunteered to do this, not for profit, really because of his heart. He wants to do this. And we've developed ways to redevelop Gaza. Gaza, as President Trump's been saying, has amazing potential, and this is for the people of Gaza. We've developed it into zones. In the beginning, we were toying with the idea of saying, let's build a free zone, and then we have a Hamas zone. And then we said, you know what, let's just plan for catastrophic success. Hamas signed a deal to demilitarize. That is what we are going to enforce. People ask us what our plan B is. We do not have a plan B. We have a plan. We signed an agreement. We are all committed to making that agreement work. There's a master plan. We'll be doing it in phasing. In the Middle East, they build cities like this in 2-3 million people. They build this in 3 years. And so stuff like this is very doable if we make it happen. Rockville will start with. This will show a lot of workforce housing. We think this could be done in 2-3 years. We've already started removing the rubble and doing some of the demolition. And then New Gaza. It could be a hope, it could be a destination, have a lot of industry, and really be a place that the people there can thrive, have great employment. Once this starts going, we think there should be 100% full employment and opportunity for everybody there. And we have a lot of data on what can be, but we think that this really gives the Gazan people an opportunity to live their aspirations. But it all starts with security, and it all starts with governance. Final note I'll just say on the Board of Peace, which is that all the lessons we're doing is we're basically studying the best practices from all over the world, and we're watching who does education the best, who does healthcare delivery the best. All of these things it's not secret IP. All this is IP that the Board of Peace is going to make public, and we want to encourage all the countries to be able to follow these best practices. A lot of the things that President Trump is doing in America, if they're working, we should all be copying them. If we find what's working in other countries, we should be copying them too. And so what the Board of Peace will have the ability to do if we're successful with Gaza is really show how do you do peace implementation, which is something that when we got this deal done, we didn't really find too much expertise or know-how on how to do it. So as we're creating this system, hopefully it's something that we can just document these learnings and make them available to all else who want to use them in the future. So demilitarization, this is something we're starting now that we have a new government in Gaza. This government will be working with Hamas on the demilitarization to really take the principles that were agreed to in the document to the next phase, and hopefully that will be successful. Without that, we can't rebuild. So if Hamas does not demilitarize, that will be what holds back Gaza and the people of Gaza from achieving their aspiration, and that's very important. So the next 100 days, we're going to continue to just be heads down and focused on making sure this is implemented. We continue to be focused on humanitarian aid, humanitarian shelter, but then creating the conditions to move forward. So thank you. Final point I'll just make is this is really only possible because of the work of so many people and President Trump's great leadership. but a lot of you have been asking how can we help. So the countries have all been incredibly generous. We'll be doing the first conference where we'll announce a lot of the contributions that will be made in a couple weeks in Washington. From the private sector, there'll be amazing investment opportunities. I know it's a little risky to be investing in a place like this, but we need you to come, take faith, invest in the people, try to be a part of it. And then finally, I'll just talk to people on the media and on the social media, which is this deal only happened because we worked with Israel, we worked with Turkey, we worked with Qatar, we worked with Saudi, we worked with Egypt. I mean, everyone worked together. We worked with UAE. We all worked together to make this happen. I see a lot of people trying to escalate, criticizing Israel or Israelis criticizing Turkey or Qatar. Just calm down for 30 days. I think that the war is over. Let's do our best to try working together. Our goal here is peace between Israel and the Palestinian people. Everyone wants to live peacefully. Everyone wants to live with dignity. Let's put our efforts towards promoting those who are doing the work to build this up, like Ali and his committee. Let's focus on the positive stories, and let's just calm down, turn a new chapter, and if we believe that peace is possible, then peace really can be possible. So we're going to continue to work every day. We need all of your help to do it. And again, I just really want to thank President Trump for his leadership in doing this. This would not have been possible without your commitment to this. Everyone thought it was impossible to end this war. You never gave up. You never stopped. Every time there was a setback, you told us to try harder. You gave us different ideas. And we've made several impossible things happen just in Gaza to date, and there's no reason why we shouldn't be able to make even more impossible things happen. So really thank you for your amazing leadership.